G'day, I'm Kate Grarrock. I normally do hiking videos, but I am doing a little recap of Alone Australia. I was lucky enough to be a participant, and we're cracking into episode 2. We start out today with Rob and his beautiful comment about a dingo's breakfast. He goes on to explain that it's a drink of water and a look around. And, excuse me, I just love that about this series. It's everything Alone, but it's also got this beautiful Australian flair and slang and terms in it, which just makes it so fun. Sadly, this episode we see Rob start to struggle with being out there on his own, and he describes it quite beautifully about connecting to the country and listening to country. And I really would have loved to have seen Rob in an environment where he could have thrived. I would have loved to see more of Rob and heard more of his stories, because he is just such an amazing guy, and it would be, I'd love to see more of him in the future in some way. I loved his exit too, and I think he can be really proud of that, because he wasn't there to fight against nature. He was there to work with it, and he could see the writing on the wall really early. That's not a place to live and survive, and I think he's probably the most sensible one to tap out day 2, to be honest. It was a challenging environment, and so much respect for Rob. Then we jump to Gina briefly, and she's looking for a site for her permanent shelter, and it looks like big things are happening with this shelter, and I just can't wait. She's a rewilding instructor, and she's going to show up with something pretty cool for her shelter, so I'm very excited to see what that is. So I think we have to stay tuned. We don't see too much of Gina in this episode. We jump to Chris then, and we get that beautiful, he really encapsulates that fleeting moment of sunshine that we experienced there, and everyone's just like, I think whenever the sun shone through, everyone runs out there and just absorbs that little ray of sunshine and the warmth, and it was just such a beautiful treat. And I thought that shot of him was, it just it just made me think, the sun. Then we flick to Peter, and unfortunately on the first night he sort of just threw up his shelter and some of his gear got wet, and it's devastating. I think for all of us watching that, we think, you're trying so hard out there, and obviously that's, something that you're trying to avoid, but shit happens sometimes out there, and I really feel for Peter for this, because it just sort of sets him off on the wrong foot, and hopefully he can, sort of make the most of it and scramble and sort that out. But then, then we see him, he's lost his head torch temporarily, the poor guy, and I love the quote where he said something about his amazing wife said to him, just keep your shit together, Pete. And that's the voice that you have in your head when you're out there constantly, and something you do doesn't quite go right, and you think you can hear your partner or your friends being like, now Katie, just don't do this, or Kate, make sure you do this. And it's like these thousands of voices, and then you're knowing that people are going to be watching this and judging this, and there's a huge amount of pressure with that, but it's also your own inner dialogue that you're sort of contending with out there, and making sure you do keep your shit together, and you don't misplace your ferro rod like we saw Beck being pretty diligent with, or your head torch, and you're hearing your wife in your ear, don't do this, don't do that. And so there's this weird pressure, I guess, that we put on ourselves that's added to that. And we see poor Peter copping that weight of a couple of little decisions that in that environment can be a game changer. So hopefully we see him sort through those issues and move on to bigger and better things. And then we flick to Mike and the shoey, and drinking the water out of his gumboot. Now this is just genius. This is another thing that I'd put in my little list of to-dos next time, and so all credit to Mike for that. I struggled, we only have a pot, or you could choose a water bottle as well, but I sort of chose to prioritize other items over a water bottle. But a rubber boot is the perfect device for holding water, and so that would be definitely something that I'd try and incorporate if I had another crack at this. And so once again, I'm loving watching these people living in this same environment as I did, and seeing all their cool ways of navigating that experience, and I can't wait to see the level increase as the seasons go on. It rains so much, but that's this beautiful source of water, but how can you capture it and store it? And so the shoey was a beautiful one. I had my pot, but it can only store a certain amount, so to have a rubber boot would have been a real asset to add to that, the amount of water that you can store, and not have to then have a fire every night to treat that water. Mike has a chat about the snags in the lake and those dead trees, and what an issue it is for fishing. And I think I've certainly never fished in an environment that's had that many dead trees, and it certainly was a huge issue. And it was just it was soul destroying. You'd throw the line out, boom, lost. And, you only have a limited amount of hooks. So you lose one and you start to get a bit shaky. And then you say, like, okay, I'm going to cast it again. I've got to get fish. And so it's good to capture that and the difficulty. And then that's why he's making a canoe. And I'm really excited to see this canoe. It's, we love that MacGyver stuff that comes out of the Alone shows and the series. So I'm really excited to see how he goes with that, and hopefully he pulls it off. So then we flick to Beck, and she's just not having much fun either, unfortunately. I think she set up camp near a devil's den, and we certainly saw, like, the devil footage and the smell. She kept talking about the smell, and that's just that's a bit creepy. And so in the middle of the night, she could hear a heap of animals moving around. And so I think first up we see her looking for a new site to set up camp. So she's trying to make a nice change to make her environment more comfortable for herself. We also see in Beck, once again, I love her pure honesty, and it's such it's so good to follow her early in the story, because she's so honest about the difficulty of making fire in that environment. And I think all of us go on the show knowing how to make fire, but holy moly, that environment, it was so wet. Everything was so wet from the rain alone. And even if you pulled stuff in under your shelter to try and dry it out, I think that I've seen a quote, something like 80% humidity. So even the dry stuff was wet from the humidity. So trying to get a fire with a ferro rod was really challenging. And, some days I couldn't make fire, and other days I could. And we see Beck's poor ferro rod just gets a hammering. She's clearly been trying so darn hard to get that fire started. But I think with the humidity, even if you have this nice dry tinder bundle, it's very hard to get it started, because the humidity alone makes that bundle quite moist, and getting the spark to actually catch in that environment was really challenging. And then, sadly, we see our second person go when Beck just finally decides that it's time for her to leave. And I am really sad to see Beck leave the show, because she is just such a beautiful, lovely person. And I hope that our paths cross again, because I think having a bit of Beck in your life would always be just such a wonderful thing. And so, like Rob, I'm sad to not be able to watch her on this show and not to be able to learn more about her through the show. Now, Jimmy's the last person we see on this episode, and Jimmy is such a unique person. I actually sat next to him in boot camp, and he was such a breath of fresh air. He's just such a humble, friendly, down-to-earth guy who the way he talks, you wouldn't think he had these experiences and skills, but he has just such amazing skills, but he's just so humble about them too. And obviously, given his departure from COVID is just devastating, because I would have loved to have watched him. And I really think, he just could have won this. I really do think, because he just had such a lovely attitude of just like, oh, well, like water off a duck's back. Oh, it was just so cool. And I hope, maybe he does come back for season 2 or something else we see him, because I would love to learn more about Jimmy. And, like we saw there, he was trying to make the most of it, but you could see he was struggling. It was hard for him to move around. And eventually the doctors came in and checked him out, and his heart rate was too rapid. And so they had to pull him from the show. And I don't think anyone in Australia wasn't disappointed to see his departure. And I think, once again, all the work that goes into being there, to sitting in that position, ready to deploy, like, the learning, the hoops you have to jump through, the gear you have to buy, the checks, the equipment, the learning, you're there. And then for him to get bounced on, the first few days for COVID, it doesn't feel fair, but I guess that's just part of the game, isn't it? Unfortunately, that's something that got him. I have absolute respect for the COVID protocols that were in place during our pre-deployment. There was, so much testing, so much mask wearing, cleaning your hands, COVID safe. The last thing the producers wanted was COVID to go through camp and to affect the participants.